letting go of the mind, letting go of this attachment to a self that is somehow, permanent thing, a thing, seeing the self as a thing. So Halloween. I wanted to talk about Halloween. I actually have a skeleton mask I thought of bringing in, but I didn't. Skeleton. And it's, so Halloween is interesting because, it derives from the Christian All Souls Day, right? Which is a day to remember the dead, right? That's the kind of, I don't know a whole lot about the practice of All Souls Day, but in Mexico it's celebrated as the Day of the Dead, right? And death is this kind of exploration. There's this exploration of touching into this truth, the reality of death. And it's I find it quite interesting how we kind of, we're really culturally quite averse to and afraid of, and we turn away from the reality of death. And so I thought it would be interesting to take this opportunity to really explore that reality in a more serious way. I mean, the holiday of Halloween, the reason it's quite interesting. It's done very playfully. Kind of those mysterious, the mystery of death, the mystery of and the scariness of what we don't know. So the fear, touch in, scary costumes. And culturally, we have, kind of made it a little more bland, so things are, like nice costumes and, so you don't even, kids mostly don't even wear, and the fact that it's kids, kids do it, although adults dress up too, and they go in, they get into costumes, but there's a lot of emphasis on, don't be too scary, don't for some people anyway. So we peek at this, we play with it, we touch this mystery of death and darkness and mystery. I think even in thinking about it, maybe even the act of putting on a costume and becoming kind of some other identity, it's kind of in a way playing with death, letting go of, my sense of being my ordinary self, and I take on this other persona. It's a way of letting go, in a way, playing. So death, the contemplation of death is very important in the teaching of the Buddha. In the teaching story of his life, so in Buddhist scripture, it's usually not a very fundamentalist kind of attitude toward the scriptures and stories, that they have to be literally true, exactly as they're told. They're teaching stories, so so we contemplate that. And so in the teaching story of the Buddha's life, it said that he grew up as a very privileged young man, and he was protected from experiences of impermanence, of aging, and of illness, of death, because his father had been told that he was destined to become a great spiritual teacher and a world teacher. And his father wisely knew that a spiritual seeking comes from a sense of the unsatisfactoriness of life in its ordinary material, pleasures and changes, that we can't hold on to the pleasures, and the Buddha had a lot of pleasures in his life. He was, in terms of comforts and beauty, and surrounded by all kinds of pleasures. But it said that at some point he had a glimpse of the impermanence of all of this stuff, and he wanted to kind of wander beyond the palace and the grounds that were very protected and kept very, very beautiful. And the story goes that even all the wilted flowers were cut off at night, so he wouldn't see flowers that had kind of expired or wilted. And so there's this story, and I'm going to read it because a version of it, which I think is very beautifully told by Douglas Pennick. He recently did a series in Tricycle Magazine, and so this is after the Buddha, after Siddhartha. He was then Siddhartha. He wasn't yet the Buddha. After Siddhartha went out, he went out three times, or 4 times, and he saw first someone who was aging, and then someone who was sick, and then the 3rd time he saw someone who had died, and he went out with his coachman, who was also his friend, and so there's a dialogue between them. So this is, the story goes, after his 2nd encounter with illness, Prince Siddhartha again returned to his former princely preoccupations, but he could not so easily forget that he had seen that all are fated to endure old age and sickness. Again he grew restless and ill at ease. He wanted to know more the fate of those who live in this world. He summoned his chariot and once more set forth. And this time he saw a procession of men and women weeping. On their shoulders they carried a stretcher. On it was the form of a woman wrapped in cotton, shrunken, brittle, motionless. Her face was gray, her mouth open, but she did not breathe. Flies crawled in and out of her nose, but she did not react. She was rigid and lifeless as a stick of dried wood. Those carrying her and all those in the procession were weeping and crying. The prince asked, "What is that thing in the shape of a deformed woman? It is rigid and immobile and must be carried by others. It is followed by a small crowd, wailing and wearing white clothes. What is this being? She does not seem to suffer. What is she doing?" The charioteer replied, "My lord, She has neither intelligence nor feeling nor breath. She sleeps without consciousness, like grass or a piece of wood. She is insensitive to pain or pleasure. Friends, family, enemies, all have no meaning for her. Her consciousness no longer animates her body. Sire, she is dead. The prince was troubled. He said, "Is this woman the only one stricken in this way?" The charioteer answered, "No, this is the end that awaits every living being. Death consumes all that lives. What is left is a husk, a shell that has no consciousness." The prince was disturbed. He asked, "And where has it gone, this life, this consciousness?" "No one knows, my lord. But certainly many religions and many philosophies have taught that a soul or consciousness has an afterlife. Is this true?" "All we know are visions and words from living men and women. The dead do not speak." Prince Siddhartha reflected for a long time. He listened to the wind fluttering in the palms. He smelled smoke from cook fires. He saw women in their silk robes walking in a park and heard children shouting happily. So we know we will die, but we do not know anything beyond that. Death, my lord, is the end of our understanding. Then Prince Siddhartha knew what death was. He shuddered and leaned against the chariot. His words were full of distress and amazement. And we cannot stop it. Our minds teem with theories. We struggle and we kill to take control of destiny. We fill the world with dreams. No matter, we will die. No matter, we do not know when or why or for what purpose. The charioteer did not answer, and they returned to the palace in silence. So that was his third teaching or messenger. In the suttas on the Buddha's life, they call these the heavenly messengers. So death is a heavenly messenger. Aging and illness is a heavenly messenger, or heavenly messengers. So one of the ways that I think that we see the brilliance and the giftedness of Siddhartha's spiritual seeking, spiritual journey, is the way that he just didn't turn away. When he saw something, he didn't go into denial, he didn't distract himself, he didn't say, "Oh, well, it's, not for many years, I'm not going to live a long life." He just went there with such courage and kind of focus. Like he really wanted to know the truth. And I think that's so brilliant. And it was a deep motivator in his practice to really know that he didn't, he couldn't know when death would come or had no control over how he would die, and he wanted to realize freedom before he wanted to awaken before death came. And after his awakening, and Buddha, the word Buddha just simply means awake. So after his awakening, woke up to the causes of suffering, and which we're talking about today, and we talk about all the time, and began teaching it. And he would talk to his students a lot about contemplation of death. He said that it was the most important contemplation they could do. He said you should imagine that there's a sword hanging over the back of your neck all the time, and it's held by a single thread. And that's how close death is. And other teachers also talk about death and contemplation on death. The shaman Don Juan said, walk with death always at your left hand. And so it's important to remember that we will die. There's this story of somebody, I think it was some kind of king or deva, like a being, a heavenly being, but just some wise king speaking to Krishna, I think it was. Anyway, I'm not sure who these deities are, but I just remember the essence of the story, which is that the king asked the deity, what is the most kind of surprising or unusual or kind of what is it that's kind of most remarkable about human beings that you find, and or the way the human mind works? And he said, and the answer was, what's most remarkable is that people see people dying around them all the time, and they don't really get it that it's going to happen to them too. We don't really take it in. So somehow we think, well, not me, not me. There's another beautiful story. It's one of my favorite teaching stories of the Buddha about this young woman. Her name was Gautami Tissa, and she was very skinny. She was born in a poor family, and she was kind of ridiculed, and everybody called her Skinny Gautami. And but finally, at one point she married and she had a son. And so because she had this son, she was respected. But the son, when the son was just a very little child, he was playing and he injured himself and he died. So she was grief-stricken, and she was grief-stricken. What it says in the discourses. What really broke her heart was, she loved her son, but before before her son was born, she had received only scorn and ridicule. But now that he had died, she was, she had lost the source of her honor. So, she said, now they're going to want to take him away and put him in the charnel ground, which is the place where they put, in that culture, they would put people who died in an open field where the birds and the other animals could consume them, and they would just decompose in the air. So she became sorrowful to the point of madness. She lost her mental balance. And she took the dead corpse on her hip, and she went around the neighborhood and the community, and she kept asking people, my son is sick. My son is sick. Do you have some medicine? Can you cure him? Give me some medicine. And people just reviled her, because they said, oh, you're nuts, you're crazy, you've lost your mind. And they said, your son is dead, you can't bring him back. But she couldn't grasp what they were saying. She was too unhinged. But then there was somebody in that area who was more wise and more perceptive and kind. And he said, go and see the Buddha, and he will help you. And so she went and she found out where the Buddha was teaching, and she went and she talked to him. And as she she said, she approached him and she said, oh, Blessed One, give me some medicine for my son. And immediately the Buddha understood what was going on. And he said, go into the village and then go and ask at the houses for a mustard seed, but it has to be from a house where no one has ever died, or when no one has known death. So either the death of a loved one, related to them, or the death has never been known. And take that mustard seed and bring it back here. And so she was very glad, and she was encouraged, and she said, thank you, I'll go and do that. And she went to the first house, and she said, can I have a mustard seed? And they said, sure. And he said, but it has to be if this house has never known death. And the person said, well, how could that be? Of course, we have known death. Many have died in this house, and many have died that are related to us. And then she went to a second and a third house, and she got the same answer. And at a certain point, her madness left her, and her right mind was established, and she understood what the Buddha was teaching her. And she thought, of course, this is how it will be in the whole city. And I too will die. And she brought her son to the charnel ground. And she said, it's not just a truth for one village or town, nor is it a truth for a single family, but for every world settled by gods and men, this indeed is what is true, impermanence. And so she went back to the Buddha, and the Buddha said, well, have you gotten that mustard seed? And she said, finished, sir, is the matter of the mustard seed. You have restored me. And then the Buddha said, a person with a mind that clings, deranged, to sons or possessions, is swept away by death that comes, like mighty flood to sleeping town. And so the story goes that she went on to become a disciple of the Buddha, and she came to full awakening. So the mind clings. The mind clings to so many things. The mind clings to our identities, to our possessions, to our roles, to our relationships. So the Buddha's teaching invites us to come to this place of non-clinging, which doesn't mean that we don't care. It doesn't mean that we don't love. It doesn't mean that we don't have compassion. But there's a deep knowing, a deep insight into the truth that nothing can be held on to, not even this body. And the Dhammapada, which is a wonderful book of teaching poems in the Pali Canon, says that unlike those who don't realize that we're here on the verge of perishing, or unlike those who don't realize that life comes to an end, is another translation, those who do, their quarrels are stilled. So that's a particular translation that I found. It's a little stilted. But the point is that when we think about death, are our quarrels really so important? Are our, the things that we're holding a grudge about, are they really so important to us? Is this what we want to be remembering when we are, in that moment at the end of life? And so when we have the courage to contemplate death, and when we are meditating in this courageous manner that we've talked about today and so many times in our gatherings, that we're seeing how the mind clings moment by moment. Well, in that moment, when we're seeing through the clinging, seeing through the attachment and letting go, that is a dying to the self. That is a dying to the ego. That is a dying to clinging to the small self. And in that dying to the small s-self, we can begin to align with and inhabit that quality of presence which the Buddha called the deathless. The Buddha called the unconditioned. Nibbana, the extinguishment of clinging. So it's true, we don't know. The dead do not speak. And we can't know with any certainty, is there some kind of continuity of consciousness or life or death? Or does, And yet, as we begin more and more to experience that spacious quality of presence, big C consciousness, perhaps we could call it, the knowing quality of mind, without clinging, that stillness, spaciousness, that sees through the identifications that rise and fall. We can have an equanimity around both living and dying, so that when we do arrive at that moment in which the death of this body will occur, since we all certainly will, we may stay present in that moment as well, and open-hearted, and loving. So, maybe today, since we only have a couple of minutes anyway, I won't open to questions. It's maybe something to just to sit with this this remembrance that this body will die, that there's something called the Four Recollections, that I am subject to, that I too am subject to aging and to illness and death, and that all that I am is the unfolding of my life is directed. My happiness, my unhappiness is directed through choices that are made moment by moment. And so cultivating mindfulness enables us to make the choices. The choice to stay present, the choice to stay loving, the choice to stay attuned to what is most important to us in our lives. And so I invite you to really carry this contemplation, not in a heavy way, like, oh, duh. But, if it evokes in you a feeling of fear, open to that fear. And if it evokes in you a feeling of regret, open to that regret. If it evokes in you a feeling of wanting to reach out and express your love to your family, to your friends, to the world, well, open to that love. Because death is a wonderful teacher. The remembrance of death is a wonderful teacher. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you well in this practice.